We're going to be talking about getting assistance with PIPs, performance improvement plans, performance management plans. There's a pile of names for these things, but we're just going to talk about when you're being performance managed. So what does a performance managed plan or a performance improvement plan mean to you? So if you've been working for an employer and they feel that you're not quite working to the level they want you to, they might put you onto some sort of PIP, performance improvement plan. Now that might take a lot of different, might look at a lot of different ways. It could be, it's a really formal plan. You've got a piece of paper and you've sat down with your employer and you've really nutted out the different issues. It's been well particularized and you have some really clear performance targets that you know you need to keep. There's also going to be some assistance and that's going to be really helpful for you. Or the plan could be a lot less organized than that, and it could just be, hey, I can see that you haven't answered the phones properly. Please follow the phone plan, answer the phones right, and we'll revisit this in a week's time. Now, as you can imagine, if you're getting it wrong, it's probably not very helpful to just be told you're getting it wrong. So hopefully at that point, you have the ability and you've got the, and you feel you can, talk to your employer or talk to the person that's telling you you need to improve about how that might look. So what does improvement look like? So if you were to achieve that goal at the end of the week, what does achievement look like? And that's actually super important for PIPs. Having a clear idea about what you need to achieve and how you can achieve that and getting help to achieve it along the way is really the ideal situation. But of course, time, money, availability of people all becomes a massive problem when these PIPs come into place. So what are the links to use? So what that might mean is if you're managing those targets and you're getting it right, then your employment is going to continue without too much issue. But if you're failing to make those targets or failing to perform, you might find yourself in a situation where that performance improvement plan or performance management plan turns into a termination. And that's going to be really distressing for you because the moment you get this plan, you might feel like your job is on the line. And of course, stresses rise, you make more mistakes when you're stressed. It just becomes a massive problem. So this is where dialogue really helps. If your employer is really genuine about helping you improve, then they're not going to mind you asking more questions about how to get it more right more often. They're not going to mind that you're going to be worried about your job and that you want to keep it. So you just need to continue talking to them about that. Has your employer placed you on a plan? Now, obviously, if you've been placed on a plan, something has gone wrong with your employment. And it could be that it was completely blindsided and off left field and you feel like this is just something that you didn't expect, or it's a long time coming. There's been several informal conversations with you about this. The first thing you need to do is go back to your workplace policies and procedures and have a look to see whether they've followed the different criteria to get you to that plan to begin with. For instance, a really sophisticated business with a really sophisticated policy is going to have a process in place. So it might first say that they have some informal discussions with you about what improvements you need to make. There might be some additional training they send you to or some help that they might give you, and that's all really informal. And then you might get something in writing saying, hey, look, you haven't made this target, let's talk about this more formally. And then if you're still failing, even with the assistance and even with the help and the conversations and the dealing with the stress levels and everything, you're still not performing, then that's when a formal PIP might come onto your desk. That's when you have a formal meeting and your employer will more than likely go over each of the criteria, and you and your employee can sit there and match that criteria up. You can ask questions, it can be answered, and it's very clear with clarity. I've been placed on a performance management plan. Does this mean I'll be terminated? Look, absolutely not. Hopefully, because you've been placed on a performance management plan or a PIP, your employer is hoping you're going to improve. They've put a lot of time and effort to employ you. They've put a lot of time and effort into training you. Hopefully they're going to put the same time and effort into getting you to the point where you're going to succeed. And that's the point of view you're going to need to take to be successful at this. We really encourage you here at MJT Law to put your best foot forward. Tell your employer you want to keep your job. Tell your employer you're really worried about not meeting this criteria because there's some clarity there that you need. Or you just can't make that criteria because of some issue. For instance, if you just cannot answer all the emails because you have to go home and pick up your kids from daycare, then you need to let them know this is the reason why you're failing in that particular criteria point. And you need to communicate with your employer how to succeed in that. So it does not mean you're terminated. It does not mean that this is a road to termination. Or we need to start with the thought process that it doesn't mean that this is a road to termination. So I think that it's really important that you have an open dialogue with your employer about this. Now, can I get performance management plan taken off my employee records? Well, look, that's a matter between yourself and the employer. Employee records aren't public for a start, so your next employer shouldn't be able to look at those employee records. It is unusual for an employer to say to an old employer, a new employer to say to an old employer, have they been under some performance management plan in the past? But there is a possibility that actually might happen. And if you feel that this PIP has been put on you in a really unreasonable way, the goals were completely unreasonable, or you were never going to meet the criteria, then there are ways to do appeals and to ask your employer to remove it from your record or to have it sealed, for instance. But quite honestly, that's a really unusual tactic for your employer to say yes to. To be perfectly honest, it's really unusual for your employer to say yes to that sort of request. I think that the better strategy, if you're looking at having this PIP to not follow you from employment to employment, then you need to have an open dialogue with your employer about what they are going to say if questions come up about your performance. Can I resign during the process? That's a really interesting question, because if you're on a performance management plan or performance improvement plan, it's about your performance at work. This is not about whether you can resign or not. Resignation is about whether you meet the criteria of resigning. For instance, have you given enough notice? Are you resigning with under the rules of the employment contract or under the criteria of the employment contract? So absolutely, yes, you can resign. You can resign your job at any time. But you just need to remember that you need to comply with your employment contract or the NES that's in the Fair Work Act, national employment standards when it comes to resignation. For instance, there might be requirements for notice periods, and that notice period might be perfectly reasonable because you're in some sort of debit-credit relationship with your employer. For instance, if you get paid monthly, you might get paid 2 weeks in arrears and 2 weeks in advance, and therefore your employer is always going to ask for 2 weeks notice. So if you resign without that 2 weeks notice and they've paid you up front, then perhaps that's not a good idea to resign so quickly, and you need to provide that notice. But resigning during a performance improvement plan, absolutely. But you just need to realise, if you do have a notice period and you're working that notice period out, your employer can continue to comply and continue to require you to comply with that improvement plan. Now, if you find that you're in a bit of a situation where you need assistance, for instance, you might find that the PIP has come too early and it hasn't followed the procedures of your workplace, or it's unfair, or it's not particularised enough, or you're just feeling like it's wrong, then you can absolutely give us a call, or you can give us a call anyway, of course. We'd love to hear from you. But you can give us a call, and we're going to be able to walk you through that PIP. We're going to be able to tell you what seems to be reasonable, what isn't, and we can help you communicate with your employer about this. And if need be, we can talk about exit negotiations, which I discuss on a different part of my website. Thank you for watching.